Hmm. Seems like there should be a lot more people, huh?
Christine was missing from the main one, so she's usually part of this. Isn't Charles supposed to be here?
Charles should be here.
And I guess obviously Grant.
And Grant, yeah. And then we're good. I think I got the video thing situated. I couldn't edit while we were in the meeting. It wouldn't let me. So you guys should be able to share your video.
Yeah, I was able to. I just didn't want to be the only one sharing my video. Okay, well now I have to.
If I have to, I guess. I'm sure this is exciting for the live YouTubers that may be watching it.
Can anyone shoot Grant a text? Is he, you know where he is?
Well, he has 1 minute. Supposed to start at 4:40.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize we were early.
So I was looking out my window just a little bit before our first meeting, and a merlin showed up trying to pick off some of my birds at my feeder. Little falcon that loves to munch on birds at feeders. I think they just float. They know where all the feeders are, and the bird feeders are in the neighborhood, so they float around looking for easy pickings.
Did he have success?
Excuse me?
Did he get any?
I didn't see that he got any, but he was just perched in a lilac bush waiting for something to show up.
Nice.
Friends who bought a house that had a little fish pond in the backyard that they didn't do much with, but then one day a kingfisher just posted up on their fence and picked off every single fish out of there.
Yeah.
So they never had to do it.
We had a neighbor with a koi pond, with a goldfish pond, and they had right in the middle of the university area, and they had a little pond that was not much bigger than a dinner table with goldfish in it. And on several occasions, they had a great blue heron show up. I mean, it was almost impossible for him to take off through all the big tall trees, but he would just plop down and he'd just wipe out every fish in the pond.
Okay, it is 4:41. Sorry to interrupt. We are live right now, so I think we should start.
Joe, do you need to read the public process deal, the virtual meetings?
Yeah, I can do it real fast. Let me.
We're missing Charles and
Christine.
who else? And Christine.
So I will go ahead and read it since it's right in front of me, if that works for you guys. Because I'm not sure who is chair on this. It's been so long, unless you guys remember.
Christine, I think.
I think that's right.
Okay, so since she's absent, do you want to read it, Grant, or do you want me to go ahead?
I'll let you go ahead and do that.
Okay. Thanks for joining our meeting being held via Zoom webinar. When I call for a public comment, please use the raise lower hand feature to let me know you wish to be recognized. Our host will allow you to talk, and you will need to unmute your mic. If you have joined us by phone today, you can raise and lower your hand by pressing *9 and mute and unmute using *6. If you are participating by phone, I'll call on you by reading the last 4 digits of your phone number. If you are participating by computer, I'll call on the name that was listed when you entered our webinar. Okay.
Okay, well, we can just jump right in. So I've got some documents for us to review today, and I grappled with
Uh-oh.
Froze up.
Grant's internet has failed him.
So Deanna and Daniel, you're still on?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm still here.
Well, we lost the leadership.
Oh,
Oh,
there
they're back. Looks like they're back again.
did
You
you
grappled
did you
with-
guys hear all that?
We lost you at grappled with.
You grappled with, and that's what we want.
Okay. That was the perfect place. Leave you hanging. I grappled with whether or not to give you the documents before the meeting versus sort of presenting them now. And I chose to present them now for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted you guys to see them before I didn't want the public to see them until you guys had a chance to weigh in a little bit. And two, I wanted to just sort of provide a rundown of what we're looking at so it's not sort of out of context. And so this might seem a little bit backwards. Maybe I chose wrong. We'll see. But I've got some documents in my screen and see if we can't just start going through them, and I'll just kind of explain what we're looking at. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Whenever that was, I sort of did what we see right now is this is the application, so that basically what the either me as the city, if it's a city project, or the sponsoring agency would fill out and submit to me if it was, say, Five Valleys Land Trust or another partnering agency. And so basically we'll look at the applications and then the evaluations, and that's the evaluation obviously is what you guys use to evaluate projects. And so what I did was I created I'm proposing a process, and we're calling it level 1, 2. Level 1 is essentially when, and let's look at this in the context of, say, like a Five Valleys Land Trust proposing a project. They bring us, obviously there will be talks before this application is submitted, most likely with at the staff level. But we're going to assume that we're at the point where everything is looking legal and eligible, and so the sponsoring agency submits a level 1 application and cover sheet. So we're looking at the cover sheet here, and what my plan is to sort of walk you guys through this, and we can dig in where it makes sense, and then leave you with the documents, and then have you guys comb through it more detail. And then next time we meet, we'll go over all the feedback and input you guys have and questions and all that stuff. But feel free to stop me if you have any questions or anything doesn't make sense. So the applicant basically submits this cover sheet, which is just just the information type of project, just very general details. And this is sort of the meat and potatoes of the level 1 application. So it's essentially asking for description of the project, conservation values, how the objectives meet the bond criteria. We ask for maps, anticipated project timeline, budgets, and what the funding sources are. And basically that is, let's see, what else do we have? And so this is for, and one of the reasons why this took so long is because obviously with the new bond we now have capital improvement projects eligible. And so I had to sort of I had to create that whole side of this. As you know, in the 2006 bond, those projects were not eligible. So there was nothing to base, the process on. So this is what I did was I created two separate applications, one for conservation easement, fee title acquisition, or other easements or interest in land, and then another one that is basically exactly the same for capital improvements. And so the landowner then, and I'll just walk you through the process as we go. So they submit that to me. I basically look at it through the lens of is it legal or not? Is it a legal and eligible proposal for open space bond funding? And does it generally meet? Is there something catastrophic, or is there any major red flags? And I basically my idea is to do that at the staff level, and then create a report that I then submit to you guys, and basically my conclusions, so that you're not reviewing a project that may or may not even be eligible. How does that sit with you guys?
That seems reasonable to me, that we wouldn't waste our time with something that would be an illegal acquisition.
Yeah.
End of the day.
Yeah, hopefully this sheds a little bit more light on the origin of a lot of these projects. How did they in fact come about? I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like in many cases, we're just presented with kind of a take it or leave it sort of proposal, and seeing how this unfolds and develops would be, I think, helpful for me and other members of OSAC.
Good. Yeah, and that's a good point. I wanted to, it just, not necessarily during my tenure, but before that, it just kind of, I got some feedback that just kind of seemed like a lot of the projects were rubber stamps, or rubber stamp was expected, and just kind of going through the motions. And I actually wanted to provide you guys with a way to actually sink your teeth into projects and evaluate them in like a really thorough way. So that's my sort of overarching objective here. And so essentially and like the idea of how I think that should work on the ground is, we would stagger this. So if you guys were, let's say you were, reviewing, and making a final recommendation on Dean Stone, beginning of that meeting, I present, project X level 1 conclusions from staff, right? So we're not just having a meeting just to basically me just telling you that this project, it might be coming down the line that is in fact eligible in a legal use of bond fund. So, obviously we're going to try to be as efficient as we can. This is the capital improvement level 1 application. It's exactly the same as above, just really high level details about the project. These are budget templates. We just wanted this, and I want to make sure that you guys are looking at a project consistently from one project to another, so that you're not having to look at all kinds of different formatted budgets and numbers that are missing, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to make it, and at the same time, I wanted to make it, as easy on applicants as I can, while still having them provide the information we need. And then here is, so essentially, I present that, you guys concur, yes, it is in fact legal, everything seems on the up and up. Then the applicant is directed to submit a level 2 application, which is where they provide, all the details of the project in sort of narrative form, maps, and we'll get into sort of what we're asking from them. And so we're asking them to keep their application on level 2 to under 10 pages. And that might seem like a lot, but I feel like in the past, when I took this job, I was frankly like pretty shocked at, some of the two-page applications for a, $500,000 project that I saw. I think that the process itself was very transparent, and you guys definitely, reviewed the projects in the right manner. But I think creating some transparency, what is it that you guys are discussing? How do you discuss it? How do you look at projects? And then creating some kind of record to, if we ever need to, or if the public ever needs to or wants to look back at, how OSAC deliberated, besides just looking at the minutes. I think this is just a really good way of, if nothing else, just defending our process, because I think our process is sound, but this is just more of a way to sort of memorialize it. And I think there's some efficiencies to be gained too. We're asking the applicant to submit this pretty robust package of documents and information at the beginning, so that we then have everything we need at our disposal, and we can create our timelines from there. And we're not asking for more information. And the idea is to hopefully reduce the back and forth between OSAC and the applicant, so we have everything before us to make our sort of informed decision recommendation. And so we've got a project context section, and I'll let you guys dig into the actual language and everything when you have some time to review the
Charles
document.
has a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, Grant, sorry, I wasn't here in the beginning, but I finally got the right link. So I missed the introduction to the first documents. So if I understand from the little bit I heard, you create those documents, the level 1, based on conversations with potential people proposing potential projects, or how does that process start? I missed that.
So no, if it's in this sort of exercise, we're assuming it's an outside entity proposing a project, so Five Valleys Land Trust, et cetera. They basically provide me the information for level 1, and then I then put together a staff report to you guys and basically say, here's my conclusions. Yes, this project meets the language of the bond, so on and so forth. It's a legal use. And I do the same, obviously, if it's a city project. And I don't think that we would necessarily need to go through those steps, because I can do that, and I wouldn't bring it to you if it wasn't legal. So so I on the applicant to provide that information, then I just basically distill it for you guys.
Okay, thanks.
And so, and did you catch, basically, once we decide that it is in fact legal and eligible, we then move on to level 2. And this is information that is submitted by the applicant as well.
Yes.
Okay. So essentially we're asking for a lot of information here, like I said. And again, I'll let you guys run through the wordsmithing and everything on your own time, and then come back to our meeting next time. But I'll just run through it quickly. Stop me if you have questions. We've got basically a project context section. That's sort of just like the overview of the project. We've got sort of, it was one of the challenges of this is that we have so many different types of projects. It was tough to make a pretty robust evaluation document that would fit for all of those different types of projects. So so when you are reviewing it, try to look at it through that lens, just one, like the actual substance, but 2, the flow and the structure and the formatting, and make sure it just from an outside perspective that it all just makes sense and flows well and doesn't seem jumbled or too verbose or whatever it may be. So then we've got a section for conservation easement details if applicable. Same with fee acquisition property details. We then ask for project funding, and again we have our budget templates at the bottom so that you guys are seeing the same type of budget every time. And that we're making sure we have all. I feel like one of the things that I did notice is that depending on the circumstances, certain sponsoring entities were trying to keep certain numbers close to their chest, and I think that all should be pretty transparent. If we're providing funding for a project, we need to know what we're paying for, and what other partners are contributing, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to encourage more transparency on the part of the applicants than in the past. And then we dive into the actual sort of conservation open space values of the proposed project. So what I tried to do was kind of create different categories of I did look at a lot of different other counties, other states that had pretty robust open space programs, and I'm pulling from my time at the Bitterroot Land Trust. The Ravalli County, believe it or not, actually has a pretty good and thorough process for reviewing open space projects. So I pulled from some of my experience down there, but basically we have our our separate categories of values and resources. So wildlife habitat. We've got water quality and water resources, agriculture and working lands, and we have features built in. If it's not applicable, then we're not asking for the information, obviously. Outdoor recreation and public use, scenic and aesthetic values, cultural and historic resources, and then we have just a sort of a catch-all, other unique / exceptional values that we will provide some space to fill in. And so I think one of the questions we had is, we really want to be sensitive to, certain tribal interests and tribal resources. And I just think, when we're, and maybe I'm overthinking this, but, when we're talking about how we capture those resources, I just want to be very sensitive and delicate about that. And so if any of you guys have any thoughts about how we've worded this, please let me know. I just want to make sure that we're culturally appropriate when we do that, and we are making sure that we are encouraging our applicants to reach out to tribal representatives. So that was one thing I wanted to just specifically note. And then here we have a section, and this is sort of, as you can see, as like a checklist. So basically when an applicant is going through, they can look at what their narrative and their documents and check and just make sure that they there's just a lot we're asking for. So I kind of I've been there in that position, so I wanted to make sure that there's a checklist. So we're asking for, sort of the legal documents, and the timing of this stuff we can talk about. We don't need to right now, but we're going to ask for an appraisal from every project if it's applicable. I don't think that at the time of level 2 application, those will always be available, but we'll basically just ask them to explain, if you can't provide this required documentation, explain why. And then we've got a whole litany of maps that we ask for that will hopefully depict some of the information. So we've got, a narrative, and then we've got some visuals to back it up.
So an appraisal is not necessarily required, but they have to have some demonstration on what the basis of the valuation is.
I think that we will require an appraisal, or at least a certified, real estate agent's market value analysis. I guess what I was saying is, sometimes for a bigger project at the time of level 2 application, Dean Stone, for instance, there were some parcels that Five Valleys didn't even own when they sort of applied for the Dean Stone corridor project. And so basically we'll want to see that appraisal before we disperse bond funds, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there right at the beginning. Or if we're talking about a conservation easement, the conservation easement might not be drafted at the time of application, but we'll want to see it before we, qualify a project.
I mean, we'll have a rough assessment of value during the application process, but if it proceeds, a more formal appraisal or something equivalent would be required.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So it's more of a matter of timing, I think. And so, I think that there's a little bit of work that needs to be done about capturing that timing, maybe. Then we've got the same thing for capital improvements projects, and just so you guys know, this is not coming from me. We are not, at this time, we are not welcoming applications from outside the city for capital improvements projects. So that you will only see capital improvements projects. So like, trail construction, signage and infrastructure stuff that's not like acquiring an interest in land coming from the city. That could change. That's not a binding thing. That's just more of a policy as we stand now. So
I didn't quite follow that. You said capital improvement for like county projects? I mean, yeah, the county does not have a provision for capital improvement on their share of the 2018 funds. Is that correct? Or
they do. They have the same eligibility that we do for capital improvements projects, and they're welcoming. So the county at this point doesn't do their own projects like the city does. So they are actually soliciting people to send them projects at this point, including capital improvement projects. The city, on the other hand, we've got so many, we have so much need for capital improvements projects, the Clark Fork River. I mean, that's going to eat into a big chunk of some of the bond funds. We've got the Trailhead Improvement Project that was approved. That's a big, the city has so much need for the funds for city purposes, not welcoming, say, Five Valleys Land Trust to apply for capital improvement projects funding. Does that make sense? Whereas we would allow Five Valleys Land Trust, for example, to apply for an acquisition or a conservation easement, but capital. I'm making the distinction between that and a capital improvements project.
Okay. So an outside entity only the city can apply for capital improvement projects. Only agencies within the city can apply. Five Valleys can apply for acquisition funds, but not capital improvement funds.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, that's not change based on demand and need and all that stuff. Or if there's a cool partnership opportunity, then I think we'd be open to that. Again, this is just the same kind of document. Here's our required documentation for capital improvement projects. And that's about it for the application. So again, level 1, level 2, we just ran through. Any questions on that? The idea would be to, like I said, stagger the meetings, so we're being efficient. But a level 2 application would be submitted. You guys would see it obviously prior to evaluating the project. So I think the ideal timeline would be, you get a level 2 application. We disperse that to you. You have a chance, plenty of time to review it. We then do a site visit for the project, and then we hold an OSAC meeting and do a vote and recommendation if we're ready. Sometimes we might need to have multiple OSAC meetings to discuss and deliberate. But I think that is the sort of the ideal timeline. Do you guys agree with that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. With that, let's move on to the project evaluation document. So this is basically the document that you guys fill out. You review a project, and just so you know, we're working on what we're calling the guide for applicants. That name is subject to change, but we're working on creating just a broad instruction sheet for applicants so that they can go through and there's a one-stop shop for questions and sort of an FAQ instruction sheet, and that also sort of outlines our policy. So it'll sort of state that we're not open to capital improvements projects from outside sources, things like that. So I'll show you guys that. It's nearing completion. I don't think it's quite as pressing as these, because I think we're going to have some projects coming up for review, and I want to make sure that we have a new process in mind by that time. So just know that that's coming soon. So we've got some instructions, explains the document, and this is more geared towards the public. So again, the name of the game is transparency. And so basically, like I said, this is again subject to change with your feedback. Last time we talked, I mentioned a high, medium, and low scoring model, if you will, and that's what I put together here. And so this basically matches the sort of parallels the level 2 application. So it's sort of structured in the same way, so that as you run through the application, you have the application in front of you. It's pretty consistent with your evaluations and scoring sheet. And so I think that, when you're actually doing that, maybe look at it through that lens too. So like read them sort of alongside each other and make sure that there is some flow between the documents, not just within each document. That makes sense.
So my screen still shows level 2 application capital improvement project. Or did you flash to a new screen, or is that what we're still on?
Yeah, I did. I'll stop sharing and then maybe reshare and see if that works.
Thanks, Edward, for pointing that out. I was getting confused.
How about now?
There we go. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. Oh, now I feel like I'm frozen. Okay.
Can you
Yeah,
zoom a little bit the document? Otherwise, I got to put my glasses on.
Yeah, you bet. How's that look?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. So again, we've got some instructions at the beginning here, just walking you through. Again, this is more for somebody that was just looking at this. I'll let you guys read through this, but it's basically telling you how to fill out this form. And so I'll distribute these, probably along with the level 2 application. So you'll just get a packet at that time, and we'll have all this filled out for you, all this information. And then, like I said, you'll sort of go through this with the with the application in hand. And I think it makes sense to probably do this as you see fit, but I think it probably makes sense to wait until after the site visit. So your mind, you've now been out on site, and then it's time to score. And even in Ravalli County, what we did is we scored it on site, or at least started to fill out the forms on site, so it's all fresh in your mind. So we can talk about that. But again, it parallels the application. So we've got a project overview, and basically we've got, what we did was we started with kind of questions, but then we reworded to statements. And so, this question, the project is consistent with the current open space plan, parks and trails plan, growth policy, so on and so forth. And so we're asking you to then evaluate as a high, meaning, it absolutely fits that criteria, medium, somewhere in the middle, low, it doesn't meet that. It's not sufficient, or it doesn't meet that criteria. And then if it's not applicable, of course, we'll do an NA. And so that is the overall system. So I don't know, do you guys have any initial thoughts? Does that still ring true and seem like a good way to evaluate these projects?
I mean, I like it more than the whatever weird number scoring that we used in the past. That seemed,
Yeah.
I guess, kind of arbitrary.
I agree. I mean, I have to look at this more closely, but my initial
Sure.
impression is the same as yours, Deanna.
Okay. Yeah, I know that was a question that you guys had, and it's hard to conceptualize until you actually go through it. So just wanted to make sure that initially didn't throw any of you guys off or, raise any red flags. And so let me dig a little deeper. So essentially there's several sections, and what you do to fill it out is you go through. So these will actually have A, B, C, D, or probably A, B, C. They'll be lettered just for reference. And what you'll do is you'll fill it. So let's say they're all highs. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. So if you have 6 H's, you put a 6 right here, right? So you sort of record your numbers from each section. And then down at the bottom, I think there's 8 sections. So you take your numbers from each section and you put them in here, right? And then essentially we have just a table that shows how each of you scored the project. So it's just more for my purposes and for sort of, transparency and recording, so we can see how you guys, it's sort of a summary, if you will, down at the bottom. So I don't think that that's too cumbersome, but just, think about it when you're going through it and let me know what you think. We've got a project funding section, just like the application. And then we jump in again to the conservation of open space values and resources. We've got wildlife habitat, water quality and water resources, ag and working lands, outdoor rec and public access, scenic aesthetic values, and then cultural and historic resources. So again, that same question, just making sure we're being true to the most appropriate way of, a nod to the lands that we find ourselves on. So there's 8 sections, and we do our tally. Any questions there? And I know you guys need to dig into that, and I hopefully that this doesn't seem too inefficient. I again, Charles, you missed the beginning, but I let these guys know that I was grappling with whether or not to send out the documents before this meeting versus, explain what I have in my mind as far as the process and how these things flow, and then give you a chance to review. And so hopefully this doesn't seem too inefficient, and I understand both sides. So
No, I think this is good, because if we had just received it, we'd probably had a lot more questions, which wouldn't have been a good use of time. Better to do it afterwards.
that was my thought. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So is-
Without context.
I do have one question about this. Does this capture anything that might be controversial? Is there a section about, identification of something controversial potentially about the place, something politically, or even for the section on cultural and historic value, it might be a controversial thing that maybe within a tribe there's 2 different views on its importance. So can we capture that kind of detail, or maybe it's a discussion for us to have? Do we even need to?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a really good question. The way that I have handled that is I've tried to draft the actual criterion or questions as best I can to capture some of that. But it's capturing it more on like I guess I don't know about positive, but informational side rather than are there any catastrophic issues here? It's more saying, the property contains culturally sensitive sites or resources identified by tribal representatives or documents. So I think in and of itself, that could necessarily be something controversial, right? We're trying to build trails on a tribally, you might have a camp that says like, so what? Let's, this is in the city. We need this resource. Other people might say, absolutely don't touch this. So I think that particular one is just a good example of something that could be, seen as a positive or a drawback for a project. And the way that I've captured that, and that's really good question. So like, let me know what you guys think now, and as you review it. So I've got this additional notes section down here that basically says, please record any additional comments, questions, notes, clarity related to anything in general. And basically what you'll do is you'll reference the section in question, and then just basically it's free flow narrative at that point. And then obviously that will all facilitate discussion in the meeting, and potentially more information gathering.
Grant, can you go back up to that cultural and historical section?
Sure.
So what this doesn't capture is if the proposed acquisition or if it would be positive or negative to these issues, to these resources. This assumes everything is positive. So the first question, does it contain these things? If you add this all up, everything else is on the positive, but there might be some things that actually count against it rather than for it. So if you add them up, you're getting a number that has both positives and negatives.
Yeah.
They should, it seems like it should make the number go in the other direction rather than adding to the number. Does everyone know what I mean?
I do. I do. I think that's a great point. And just so you guys know, there are we did try to do that balance in other sections, but I don't think that I necessarily caught that one. So that's a really good, I'm going to make a note. Let me just clarify to make sure I'm tracking. So basically, does it contain XYZ resources, tribal, sensitive, cultural, et cetera, historic? Another question would be, if so, does the proposal, have negative or adverse impacts on these identified resources? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. We're not capturing the potential negatives, but because of the way you're scoring this,
Totally.
If everything is scored from high, medium, and low, and you're just adding up the highs and you get a bigger number. So if it has a high impact, that number actually gets higher rather than going down like it should. Right, so it's like you have to create a negative scoring for those negative ones to bring the number back down.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And another related issue that I was thinking of is there's a section, I believe, on recreational access, and I believe there's a section on wildlife. And, both of those could be high, but when the management comes out, you're going to have to balance between those two. Say, there could be situations where recreational access diminishes the wildlife habitat value of it. So there's going to have to be trade-offs in the management, and I don't know exactly how one would want to reflect that in this assessment, because it could be a situation where, you make it wide open for public access, but then the habitat value goes away. And vice versa. So you're adding, I think that's sort of along the lines you were talking about, Charles. You're adding in both of these factors that make the number look high, but in fact, they're conflicting.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that one is in particular is one that we did discuss, and I've been doing this with my counterparts at the county on and off. And we've been bouncing questions off each other and brainstorming. That is one that specifically came up, and we'll inevitably come up with a lot of projects. And we concluded that, so Charles's example is one that, we haven't seen a whole lot of that, right? We're not typically finding these sensitive resources. We don't have a lot of historic open space project. We do have some, but that's not something we see every day. But as far as the balance between habitat and access and recreation, I mean, that's going to be present in a lot of our upcoming projects. And so because of that frequency, we decided to sort of make sure that we captured the resources in this evaluation as best we could, and then just decided that the conversation itself and the OSAC's deliberation, all of that would sort of shake out in that. I'm glad to try to throw some questions in related to that. And just generally speaking, that is the very reason why I don't like scoring, like traditional scoring for projects like this, which is high, medium, and low. And it's very clear in here that, this rating or scoring, if you will, is simply a guide, is intended to be a guide for facilitating conversation of the committee and then helping informing the committee's decision or recommendation to council ultimately. And so but going back, I'm glad to add some questions if you guys think that it's, it will be better.
Yeah, and I think that notes section at the bottom, you could use that section to clarify some of these conflicts. And
Yeah.
elaborate on the scoring, potential conflicts.
Yeah, and I think that and I draw the distinction between that example, which is a great example, and then Charles's is that we're talking about a balance basically between habitat and let's say public access. Whereas if we have cultural historic resources on site, a lot of times just being present or acquiring that land or building anything on that land could negatively or adversely impact that resource, at least in the eyes of some folks. So yeah, and I think there's another good example of that is incorporated in here is one of our charges as a committee, and it's my job is to sort of make sure that there's sort of social equity and geographic distribution and a diversity of opportunities for all people in Missoula for open space access. And so, one of the questions is basically, let me see if I can find it. I think it's here. So we're rewarding a property for being adjacent or providing connectivity to existing trails and other public space. And then we're also rewarding a project or incentivizing the property being in an area where public access or recreational amenities are underserved. Where is that question? Well, it should be here. Anyway, maybe it's up in the project context, but anyway, that's just another example of where we do try to capture that balance. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, here we go. So we're incentivizing a project in an area that's underserved with respect to open space, conservation, parks, and trails. But then we're also, again, incentivizing connectivity and adjacency and all that good stuff.
Now, I think you're asking, these are really good questions. And obviously, there's some question about how do you trade off between, in the management, as you get into the management section, how you trade off between some of these values. But I think this is a really good document for identifying the potential pluses and not necessarily negatives, but what it doesn't do, what the property will do and what it really doesn't address.
Sure, right.
One thing you might do, oh, by the way, thanks, Edward, for your example about wildlife habitat and recreational access and the trade-off. That was a much better example than the one I was thinking about with cultural, because Grant, you're right. I that's unlikely to come up. So we probably don't need to design a form around that kind of outlier situation. But I do think it's more likely to have these trade-offs between wildlife habitat and recreational access. And maybe just to deal with it simply in the form, you could just add a box like the notes box, but maybe before the notes box, just asking is there any, evident sort of trade-offs like that we can, that are evident.
Okay.
I think that's a good suggestion, Charles.
Yeah, that's it. I think we don't need to add more questions on that, because as you say, this form is just to drive our conversation in the group when we're making decisions. So
Yeah. Okay.
you've
Yeah,
done
I'll take a stab at that. Yeah, that's great input. Thanks, guys. Let's see. And then we've got kind of the same thing for capital improvements down here. It's much more succinct, and it's a little bit shorter. Project context, project funding, and then our conservation open space values. And I think, again, it's going to be, these are at this point mostly going to be city projects, if not all. But I still think, we want the, like I said, it's not binding. So at some point that could change. So we still want to make sure that our forms are geared towards both the city and, third parties. So, and just keep in mind, you guys know this, but, for capital improvement projects to be eligible for bond funding, they have to be applied to a property that is open and accessible to the public. So you couldn't do a capital improvements project on, say, a conservation easement that doesn't have public access. And then that land obviously has to be designated as open space as well. So just a sort of a side note. Let's see, it's the same thing. I think, let me know what you think as far as, think back to, I know that there was a bit of, I don't know if it was controversy, but I know some folks weren't super enthusiastic about, say, the urban reforestation project or the bond going to pay for that. Some of these capital improvement projects are going to be new territory and things you probably haven't seen before, much like an urban reforestation project or a river access and restoration project, or, keep in mind, this is all in sort of planning and design costs related to those endeavors. So, just as you go through this, keep that in mind, and, make sure that we've captured, enough of the information that we would actually be looking for in evaluating those. Let's see. Yeah, and that's, again, it's scored the same way. We've got a notes section down here. And that is it for, capital improvement evaluation. Questions, thoughts? And like I said, I will be sort of fine tuning that guide for applicants document, which I think that will be helpful. I mean, we've seen a bit of a homogeneous pool of applicants thus far, and I think that will probably change at some point. I don't know if it will change soon, but we've seen a lot of Five Valleys Land Trust projects, a lot of city projects, but I think that there are other organizations out there that are poised and becoming more poised, at least, to start trying to secure some bond funding. So I want to make sure that the process is well defined and laid out in a way that folks that might want to apply can understand it. That just saves everybody time. So again, just as you're going through the instructions, just treat it like it's the first time you've ever seen it, which it is. But you guys are very familiar with how this process generally works. So just try to put yourself in the shoes of an applicant when you're going through the sort of the application, at least.
Five Valleys, as you said, has been, our primary pipeline for acquisition projects. Have you had contact with other organizations that have different interests that are looking to get funding? I mean, you kind of hinted that you did. Are there others out there that you're aware of? Or?
Well, I think that Mountain Bike Missoula had some strategic planning. Like they're toying with the idea of potentially, trying to go out and build some of their own trails. And I don't want to speak for them. I don't know that that's the case. They just came to mind. And I'm thinking about, there's other land trusts in the area. We've seen in other, not necessarily in Missoula, in the city of Missoula, but in like the county or in some of the other counties in Montana, like citizen collaboratives that are, savvy enough to put funds together for conservation easements or other projects like that. So to answer your question, no, not really. But I think that, there will be potential for city-county partnerships, which would be a little bit different. The process is defined in the interlocal, but it would be, basically the city applying for funds. But, I would say no, not really. But I think that there's a lot of chatter around open space, especially with the pandemic. I mean, the demand is through the roof and people are trying to address it. And, at this point we're trying to hold a trail summit at some point that got a pin put in it, obviously because of the pandemic, but I don't know. There's just a lot of discussions going on about it. So that's why I say that more than anything.
I don't have any more comments on this form, but I'm sure I would if you send the Word version, so I could maybe insert comments here and there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'll send these out very soon, and then just please track your changes in the Word document and just send them back to me. And then, in the meantime, just feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions, and I'm always glad to talk. We don't have to wait necessarily to the next meeting. But I do, I want to make sure that if we are having some kind of, more than just a quick clarification or something, that I want to make sure we do include the rest of the group if it's something sort of material. But we can make that call. So feel free to keep the communication flowing.
I've obviously done a lot of work, and the initial impression is that it's an improvement over our previous process.
Good. That's the idea. Thanks. Anything else? All right. Well, we will send those down, and please. What I guess one question: what seems like a good sort of time frame for you guys to really, realistically dig into them, provide your comments and feedback, and then for us to meet again? Do we want to try to meet before the end of the year, or do we want to? I know folks, schedules get busy with the holidays. Do we want to just try to, just plan on meeting in January, or what's your guys' preference?
Do you envision a December OSAC meeting, the main committee, the full committee as a whole?
I probably not, just because we have all these projects I mentioned in the hopper that we're trying to sort of complete before year end, and I kind of want to focus on that. Unless there's something that comes up, a new project or something that I really feel like you guys should know about, and there's some kind of time is of the essence, then probably not. So we could. That is one option I was going to throw out. We could just, instead of having the committee, the whole committee meet, we could just have a subcommittee meeting on that regularly scheduled time. And that gives us a month to review.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of circling on that idea too, either in conjunction with the OSAC meeting like we did this time, or separately.
Well, we have in our calendar, we received an invitation for December 10th for another OSAC meeting. Just FYI.
Okay. Oh, did you receive a link or something?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that those links probably just go out automatically, and then we can adjust accordingly. But yeah, if you guys are okay with that, and then, obviously if something changes with one of the projects I mentioned, or, that I feel like you guys need to know about, we'll have that meeting. And that, now that we're meeting in person, it's a little bit easier for folks to, meet for 30 minutes rather than having to come all the way to, the parks office. You can just jump on your computer. If there's updates needed, then we will have an OSAC meeting, but otherwise I'm probably not planning on it. So if you guys are going to be around and accessible and available and think it's enough, 4 weeks seems like enough time to review these documents, then I will just plan on doing that December 10th.
Yeah, it would be helpful for me to have the document to review like within the next 2 weeks. If you wait longer than that, it'll be more difficult for me to re-engage with this now that it's in my brain.
No, we'll send them out tomorrow.
Great.
Unless there's some kind of public deal, but it will not be longer than a couple days.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your feedback thus far, and I look forward to some red line.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody have a wonderful evening, and we will talk soon.
All right. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.